And start my live stream. Okay. Just a second for the stream to start. Okay, so we're going to tie Chubby Chernobyl. We're going to tie it in size 6 tonight. And this Chubby was created back in the early 90s in Utah. Everything I've read is probably on the Green River, but it's also been popular at the Jackson Hole one fly contest. So it's, and the Cheech Pierce from Fly Fish Foods said, and I quoted this in my email, that it's probably the best fly ever. And then he said, ever, 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 ever. He said, well, that's 4 ever, so that may be too many. But in any case, that's pretty high praise for it. And I've seen references to it tied down to as small as a 16. I'm not sure I want to tie a 16 in it, but I've seen references, and all the way up to, I don't see why you couldn't tie, this is a 6, at least a 4, maybe even a 2 if you wanted to. I don't, like for bass or something. But so it only uses a few materials, 5 to be exact, other than the hook. This is a mustad. I'm going to go ahead and put the hook in my vise for right now, but I'm not going to start tying quite yet. This is a 2X long mustad hook. And the underbody on this, I'm using tan UV ice dub. Pretty much any kind of sparkly dub or any kind of dubbing you want will work fine on the underbody. The tail on this is going to be tan Krystal flash, and I just happen to get UV. It's not anything special about the UV. And then since this is a size 6, we're using 3mm foam instead of the thinner 2mm like we often use for smaller patterns. Now, anything much smaller than this, I would probably use a 2mm foam. And then the legs are speckled centipede legs. These are particular ones are Montana Fly Company, but these are just tan and brown, anything special about them, just regular old rubber centipede legs. So I think the fly is pretty agnostic on what kind of material that you use with it. As far as colors, how thick you like the overwing. Like for example, this overwing on the left is quite a bit thicker, though it doesn't show on camera as much as the overwing on the right. And the overwing being on top of the water, not under, you can choose whatever color. If you like hot pink, if you want chartreuse, whatever you like for that overwing. So let's get to tying. So in your bag, you have, and it's pretty small, so you have 3 strands of this Krystal flash. So kind of try not to lose that. Those of you on Zoom, I can't give you any more, but here, if you guys lose that, I've got another package here we can use. So I'm going to start my thread. And I like to start my thread kind of where my body is going to end, that old Kelly Gallup trick. So I'm going to start it about an eye length and a half behind the eye. And I'm going to wrap back. I'm using 140 denier thread in tan. UTC 140 denier in tan. And this tan almost exactly matches the dubbing we're going to use. And I'm going to wrap back on this hook to about the barb. And then I'm going to come back forward and let my thread hang just in front of the point of the hook. Now this is where we grab those 3 strands of Krystal flash. And I want you we're going to use these 3 strands for both of our copies. So if you can, fairly closely line up the ends of the Krystal flash. So you have the 3 strands are lying pretty much the same length. And then we're going to fold it in half. And we're going to cut it in half and keep one half and lay the other half aside for our second fly that we'll tie in a bit. So now I have 3 strands about, 5 or 6 inches long. Jim, how's my light up there? Exposure good? Okay. Now we're going to fold this again in half and cut it in half. And now I have 6 strands that are about oh, 3.5 inches.
Did you start the Zoom?
I did start the Zoom, yes. And I started the YouTube. I have my notes over here this time, Jim, so I won't forget what to do.
You always ask me.
I usually start the YouTube about 10 minutes after we start. So the way I like to tie these in is I'm going to just wrap them under the hook at the midpoint, right in front of my thread. So you can see they're right in front of my thread. And then I'm going to hold my thread up, put some tension on the thread, and that way they won't slide back, and then simply wrap them back to that point right above the barb of the hook, right, which is about where the bend starts. And then bring your thread all the way back to our front starting point. Open spirals are fine. You don't have to spiral the thread close. All right, and we want to trim this tail about, it's kind of up to you, but generally about the width of the gap of the hook. So somewhere along about there. And we want to leave our thread hanging right at about, an eye and a half back there. Now, if you look at videos on YouTube, there are a lot of different ways of dubbing the body on this. Some actually start at the rear of the fly and dub it section at a time as we lay the foam on top. You'll see after we tie this kind of what we're talking about there. But I think it's easier just to go to the front and dub all the way to the back. So we're actually going to dub in the opposite direction that we normally do, because normally we start dubbing at the rear and go toward the front. But we're going to start dubbing in the front and go toward the rear. And how bushy you want that underbody is totally up to you. And if you have dubbing wax, you can use it. It's certainly not needed. I mean, it's kind of whatever you prefer, but I like to use it, so I'm going to put a little wax on mine. But you don't really need dubbing wax at all. And let's get some of our tan ice dub. And we want to create a dubbing noodle. Let me zoom out just a little bit. Jim, tell me about focus there. Is that good? Good, okay. Zooming out a bit. And I'm going to create about a 2-inch dubbing noodle, and I don't want to wrap it real tight because I want the noodle to be fairly thick. So I'm not going to really wrap down on it where it's a thin noodle. So that's probably enough. And again, your choice in color is totally up to you, and I'm going to start wrapping back from here. How thick you want the body is totally up to you. This one, I'm going to do it kind of a medium thickness, not super thick. And I need just a little bit more dubbing. So we want to dub all the way back to our Krystal flash tail. And then if you have any dubbing left over, you don't have to dub back forward. I'm going to bring my thread back forward to about the hook point again. Take off the rest of that dubbing. So I want to bring my thread back to about the hook point. Now, if you like a really bushy body, you could take a brush and pick this out right now if you wanted to, but we're not going to do that. All right, so our next thing is our foam, and you have a strip of foam, and this is enough for 2 flies. So the first thing we want to do is fold this over and cut it in half. This is enough foam for 2 flies. And it's just easier to cut it in half than it is to have that long piece of foam out there. Now, also cut it intentionally wide. You notice normally these foam bodies are about as wide as the hook gap. But so go ahead and trim the width of this to something about the width of the gap of the hook. And that, in this particular case, it's going to wind up around 3/8 of an inch. And again, it's not critical that it's exact. Yeah, that's close enough. And then we want to dog ear the corners on the tail portion. So I want to cut each corner at the back at a 45, just to do it, make a little rounded dog ear on the back of it. So I'm going to cut it, boom, and a little bit more than that, yeah. Now they make cutters for these. Jim, who makes the one you have?
River Road.
River Road, yeah, but I think this works just as well as having a cutter. And yeah, and it's, you can cut for whatever size hook you like. Now, when we place the body, the foam on here, we don't want to overlap the very back of our tail. We want to leave probably about, we want to overlap maybe half of the tail, maybe just a bit more, but leave it something like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to tie it in. We're going to tie the foam in two places. We're going to tie in here, and then we're going to tie the second tie in up at the front. So first we're going to tie in the back. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to tie in the foam here, then we're going to attach our legs in the back, then we're going to tie in our wing on the back, and we'll loop it with dubbing, and then we'll repeat that up front. Okay, so I like to hold the foam toward me just a bit and take a couple of loose wraps and then cinch down on it, and then take a few more tight wraps. Now, it's going to spin on the hook, and I'm going to talk about that when we finish, but this is going to spin pretty badly on the hook right now, so don't worry about that. Now, also what I like to do, let me turn this toward the camera. You see how narrow this is, where that thread is cutting into the foam? We're going to tie our legs there, and if we leave it narrow like that, those legs are going to be just very, very close together. They're not going to splay out. They're going to be very, very close together like that. So, and this is kind of hard to do on this foam, but I'm going to try to grab forward on the foam like that with my thread. And I want to make a little bit wider tie-in point. Now I'm going to wrap my thread over that. So now I have this slightly wider tie-in point that hopefully my rubber legs won't stay together quite as badly. Okay, so now I have this little tie-in point, and it's time for our legs. All right, so you have 2 rubber legs in your bag, and we're going to tie the entire fly with one of these. So kind of like we did the Krystal Flash, let's fold the rubber leg as close to exactly in half as you can and cut it. And put one of the sections aside because we'll use that for our front piece. Then take that short, so you have a piece now about 3.5 inches long, fold it again in half and cut it. So now I have 2 pieces, 1.25 inches long or so. All right, let me just pause there for a second while we cut legs. Okay. Now, you can tie the legs in with your choice of how you like to do it, but I find one of the easiest ways is to take the leg and push it against my thread. Now I'm pushing on the opposite side, and I'm just bringing that leg over to the near side of my fly under that piece of thread. And then I can just let go of it and kind of adjust it where I want it. And There it is. And I'll give it one more thread wrap for good measure there. And again, you can use your own preferred method for tying in the legs, but that's just a quick and easy way that works. And then I'll do the leg on the other side the same way, except of course I'll leave it on the far side of the hook. And give it a thread wrap or two. And so I now have two legs. And see how if we hadn't made this little wide tie-in point in the middle, my legs would be just totally together. They wouldn't splay out at all. Okay. How we doing? Good? Flip, Mark, Peter, good?
Doing good.
Okay, good.
Doing great.
Now, our next material, you either have two short pieces of this white material, or you have one long piece of it, like I have here. I have one piece that's about 7 or 8 inches long. What we want to do with this is we want to cut, I'm going to actually trim the end of it a little bit. We want to cut two pieces that are about as long as the foam on my fly, which is at this point 2 inches. So I'm going to cut one piece and I'll put that aside. That'll be my front wing. And then I'll cut another piece and that'll be my back wing. Now you can certainly cut these longer, but I kind of like to conserve my materials a bit. So I have a piece that you can see is roughly the same length as my foam body. All right, now kind of roll it together where it's not quite so splayed out, and lay the midpoint right over your legs. Hold that midpoint over and take a loose wrap, tie it down, a little bit tighter wrap, kind of adjust it to where your two pieces are close to the same length. And then I'm going to take the front half, pull it back, and take a thread wrap or two over, attempting to take a thread wrap or two over the material. Now, I didn't tell you what material this is. This particular material is EP fibers. Some of you have white, some of you have kind of an off-white. But these are EP fibers. Poly yarn, almost anything works for this. And we're going to trim up all this messiness later. All right, now that our wing is tied in, we want a little bit more dubbing. This time not nearly as much as we did the first time. Maybe about an inch, probably I have a little bit too much there. And then I want to wrap this dubbing between the legs on my fly. Like so. It covers up those thread wraps and helps separate the legs a bit. All right. Now we just hold back on the front of our foam. Now it's totally up to you, but in some videos you'll see where people will dub this and go forward with dubbing. My thread matches this almost exactly, so I'm just going to go forward to the forward point of my body right here. And then we're going to do exactly what we just did in the back in the front. So let me turn this where you can see it a little better. I'm going to take a couple of loose wraps and cinch that down. And again, the 140 denier thread is pretty nice for doing this. So now I have it tied down in the front. But just like I did in the back, I want to loop forward and grab that foam farther forward and make a wider tie-in point. Okay. So it's time for legs. So we should have about a 3-inch piece of leg left that from what we cut it before. So let's fold it in half. Cut it. And again, I'll wrap it around my thread and bring it to the near side of the foam. And give it another thread wrap for good measure. And then I'll take the other piece and we'll put it on the opposite side. So now I have my 2 sets of legs. There we go. Okay, so next thing is our front wing. And likewise, I am going to tie roughly in the middle of my second piece of EP fiber that I have. So roughly in the center of that, I will make a couple of wraps, pull the front to the rear, and make a few more wraps there. EP fiber is very slick. That thread is not grabbing it. Let's see here. I'm eventually going to get my thread to grab it there. Okay, got it. Okay. Now, we need to add a little dubbing once more. So, let's grab some of our dubbing. Dub between our legs. And then pull the front back after we wrap the dubbing and make a few wraps right behind the hook eye. Now we can either whip finish or half hitch, whichever you prefer. And I'm actually going to half hitch because it's up under the foam and it's a little easier to do that. Rich, I'm half hitching. You notice that?
I appreciate that.
All right. So, cut our thread and we are almost finished. Now, to trim the foam in the front, if you'll lay your scissors against, make sure you don't cut your legs, lay your scissors against the eye of the hook. I'm just tapping my scissors against the eye of the hook and just trim it straight across. And again, I like to kind of just break the corners a little bit. And then we can trim this ragged stuff. And now, I mentioned earlier I would talk about this spinning on the hook. There's a couple ways to stop that. One is I can now turn my fly upside down and I can put super glue along it at these tie-in points here and here, or along the body if I like. Or as I was tying the fly, I could add the super glue to it. But if you're like me, if you add super glue while you're tying, it's going to get all over your fingers. and it sticks to everything. So I like to add the super glue later. I'm not going to add it tonight, but I would add a bit of super glue here in the back and a little bit in the front, and that would reduce that tendency to spin quite a bit. Now, let's trim our legs, and then we are finished. And actually, these legs look pretty good about like they are, so I'm not going to trim them. But if you did want to trim them, you could just trim straight across. They look about right untrimmed. And that is it. That is a size 6 Chubby. And with this 3mm foam, it should float like a cork. Now, one little note on this fly. We have a dry fly hook tonight that we're using, which is a light wire hook. The only reason we're using that is because we had a bag of 100 of them. So instead of spending another $12 or $13 on hooks, we're just using this dry fly hook. But if I were, excuse me, if I were buying a hook for this fly, I would probably use a 2X long nymph hook, something with heavier wire. The heavier wire would act like ballast underneath and help the fly ride upright correctly. But this light wire hook, it should work fine even with this light wire hook. But again, if I were buying hooks for this, I probably want a heavier weight, like a nymph type hook. Doesn't matter, even though this is a dry fly. When you've got that thick foam, it's going to float. So you don't really have to worry about that. All right, how'd we do? Copy number 1. I see a lot of fuzzy white out there, so it looks. Let's see, Flip, Mark, Peter.
It's great, thank you. Great fly.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's. All right, let's see. All right, you should have enough material to tie one more copy. So let's go through. It's only 7 o'clock, so let's go through one more copy.